My thought, I'll just kind of jam through this beginning part that's a little overview on, I would imagine there's a few folks that aren't familiar with resource conservation districts, because that is part of our challenge, is reminding folks, you know, kind of how we were established and what our purpose was, but then to get to some of the points that Jeff was just raising. So again, my background is more agriculture and conservation policy. I did federal policy type work, but a lot of what interests me in resource conservation districts is that we have the opportunity to sort of find that common ground between agriculture folks and conservation, similar to what Bob's talking about with the Rangeland Coalition, but with all types of agriculture and conservation. So for those that aren't familiar, RCDs are a non-regulatory state special district, so like a water district or a fire district. So we have no regulatory authority, and we have a board of local landowners, so you have to be a landowner in the county. Broadly, our mission is to conserve agriculture and natural resources in this case, our jurisdiction is the county, but we're not a county agency. Clearly, there's a number of ways you can meet that mission, and it looks different across the state depending on what the local priorities are, depending on, honestly, what there's funding for. We're more fortunate than on some other RCDs that we do get a certain amount of property tax-based funding, and then we write a lot of grants and have contracts and things like that. So we did have, our federal partner is NRCS that was mentioned with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In order for them, when NRCS was formed as the Soil Conservation Service, in order for them to come into an area, there had to be an RCD established first. So we were sort of the local liaison for the federal government to come in and offer those services. And that's, you know, changed slightly over time, but in general, we still really try to have that be our role to make those federal programs accessible, understandable, et cetera, to the local landowners. But our establishment is under the State Department of Conservation, so we have both those partners. And then, you know, really what I've been trying to do is how do we best coordinate with other folks, land trusts, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, farm advisors, Farm Bureau to, you know, strategically meet the ag and natural resource needs. The biggest example is, you know, if someone's commercially producing an ag product, $1,000 or more, they're getting a lot of their advice from the farm advisors because that's their target audience. But we've got a lot of landowners now who might not be producing a commercial ag product but have acreage that still needs some kind of management. Most of it still needs to be managed in some way. This hands-off, set-aside, it doesn't work most of the time. So we're trying to kind of focus on that audience in that we've learned that's a need to help them with erosion control. A lot of them still are on canals, so they're raw water customers that have irrigation systems of some sort. All of those kinds of issues that provide a conservation benefit as well as helping the landowner. So I kind of touched on this, but briefly, our bread and butter has always kind of been this landowner technical assistance piece. So landowners can call us with whatever their issue might be, and we'll probably start with a soils map and some basic information, but then we can do a site visit and, you know, get more specific to what their question is. We certainly don't have all the answers, but we can figure out where to find those for folks. Again, as I mentioned, we're trying to focus a bit more on rural landowners. We're doing a horse property management workshop coming up March 15th. I'll get that information out. But we know there's a lot of folks that move here because it's beautiful and then they want a horse or 2 or 100. And maybe, yeah, we've definitely heard this as a concern. And again, I think, you know, I think some folks just don't know that you need to consider how many animals you're putting on what size parcel, and that you still have to manage that manure and that mud. And in years like this, if you've got some kind of pasture establishment, you need to be managing that differently for a drought, et cetera. So there's a lot that goes into that we think we can help with the outreach piece on. We do a lot of fuels reduction work. 60% of the county is, you know, forested, and there's a lot of fuels reduction work that'll always need to be done. So we coordinate with the Fire Alliance, which is a coalition of all the fire groups working on different things in the county as well as CAL FIRE. Red Suspania control. This is an invasive that's in the floodplains that is a long-standing project we've had with the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency. So that continues to be one of our projects. administering an ag marketing grant. We were asked by the Mandarin Growers Association to take over some of the fiscal responsibility of that. So, that's a way we can help out our local ag producers, a lot of which are trying to go to more of this agritourism route, or at least look for additional opportunities beyond their most obvious markets. We help the county, a lot of contracts with the county to help with stormwater management, park restoration projects, things of that nature. And then many of you know that we host the annual ag tour, which is a lot of fun. And I mean, it's great to have county support for that, they're really trying to target the legislative officials besides just the general public. We've kind of talked around, what are these different definition possibilities, and a lot of this I'm just throwing out there for discussion's sake, but you can read that there, and then you can see my question in some of the discussions with the California Summit and others were, I can make the argument either way for where and how tourism and recreation fit, but some people feel very strongly that working landscape, and it depends on why you care what the definition is. You might be trying to fit into some grant criteria or something, but I think there's at least a distinction between, are you producing food and fiber, something off of this land, tangible, in comparison to it has tourism, recreation values, which are also very important, but there's just a distinguish there that could make a difference depending on what you're using the definition for. I was asked to talk a little bit about our ag tour from last year, and working landscapes is just an interest of mine, so I decided that's what we were going to do for fun. But because thank you, there's more and more discussion around working landscapes, and I love this because I think there's a lot of potential and ways that we can help direct the conversation. So this was our title from last year. What the tour stops were actually public lands, or at least lands with a public law nexus, because one was a mitigation bank, that are managed for multiple uses. And as you can see, they incorporate grazing or other tools that also help support local agriculture. So this was talked about earlier. I'll show you our little grazing. We saw the grazing on City of Rockland property. So I'm not even going to try to use the thingy. So just to give you an idea, here's Auburn. We went down here and saw this area that's grazed, and now this is all property that is slated to be developed but isn't yet. Is that correct? That the Hazeltine grazes?
I believe so.
So right now, it's open space that otherwise is a fuel hazard, invasive weeds, etc.
Where you just pointed is Clover Valley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there's the subdivision, right?
It's planned.
Yeah, that was the explanation we were given at the time, so I say that. So, but obviously it's an important part of that producer's ability to have a full year cycle on how he feeds his sheep and how he does his business plan. So then we went over here to Wildlands, and Wildlands is a mitigation bank. So similar to what Ed was discussing, when some of the developers have to mitigate for either the Clean Water Act or the Endangered Species Act, and there's a number of ways they can do that. And Wildlands has property that serves that purpose, but they also is managed through grazing. So that's another way that still ties back in and supports the economy in the local community. And then we went all the way up to Hidden Falls Park, which just the second part of it had recently been open, so they were excited to show that out. And it was a nice day. We really lucked out on that. But they also use grazing as one of their management tools, and I think they had a contract that had been grandfathered in, but they were looking to maybe change that, I think.
Yeah, it's ending.
They were going to go out to bid, I think. Because you can't just have anybody doing it. You got to have somebody that's going to meet both goals. But again, recognizing the ecosystem services that properly managed grazing can provide. So that's what we did on the ag tour. California Economic Summit, I was asked to give just a bit of background on that. And basically what was cool about it this year is it's only the second year, but last year, my understanding is there was no working landscapes section, which is a little alarming, but I'm glad we have it this year. So, Glenda Humiston, A.G. Kawamura, others were asked to lead up this part of the summit document game plan that has to do with working landscapes and how it fits into the revitalization of California's economy. So there was a wide variety of folks that participated in a slew of conference calls to kind of narrow down I think we got 2 pages to kind of try to get narrowed down. What are the areas under that we think are important to pursue? And I want to point out number 3, market-based incentives, because I'm going to talk a little bit about that more in a minute. And then I also thought I just would mention this because this is a bit more regional. Folks may be familiar with SACOG, Sacramento Area Council of Governments, and I list there all the Placer reps just because I wanted to remember who they all were. And then some of you may know that one of SACOG's initiatives is this RUCS, Rural Urban Connection Strategy, which, is really, they did a whole urban blueprint piece, and then the RUCS piece is, what I've heard now is green print. Instead of blueprint, green print is being used about. Instead of the rural areas just becoming whatever they become, let's actually have a plan for them like we do for urban areas. Kind of, crazy. And so then they have a working landscapes committee as part of that that's basically looking at what role can working landscapes play in sustainable growth and continued agriculture in the SACOG 6-county region. So again, we're hearing this term more and more, and I think that there's a lot of good momentum. So here you go, getting to a bit more of the tie into the earlier discussions. So I will start off by admitting that I have a love-hate relationship with mitigation. And a lot of that, as I point out here, is that, I think a lot of times environmental regulation kind of ends up being the baseline or the minimal, right? This is, you have to do this because there's a law. And, that doesn't always, people aren't always really excited about having to do that. They might just pay the money to make sure it gets done and you check the box. And I think what can be offered as an alternative is this concept of ecosystem service payments, right? So landowners getting paid for the fact that they provide wildlife habitat, air quality, water quality, carbon sequestration, all of these things. So there's a number of pilots going on with this right now about, how you can quantify what those services are. You probably need a third-party person between the landowner and whoever's paying the money. I still am a believer in best management practices versus having to measure down to the absolute millimeter. We do need to have some measurement too, but when you've got science that says this best management practice, when implemented correctly, creates this environmental outcome, let's not spend $1 million going out and measuring every little drop. So, and I think one of the challenges with mitigation is it incorporated in, are those decisions being made in alignment with local land use planning? Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, and I'm actually, as much, the PCCP is a good step, and a lot of counties don't have it, but there are a lot of other counties, mostly in the valley, that have ag mitigation plans or other land use methods in place that better protect, offer another tool for protecting actively farmed land. The PCCP mostly, correct me if I'm wrong here guys, is more about the habitat connectivity and streamlining permits for development, which has value. It has value to look at these things holistically and say, where do these habitats connect, etc. But what's the incentive to a private landowner to stay? I mean, some people don't even want their, Anytime you put private land on a map, you're gonna get yelled at. So really I just offer that, I think the bigger toolbox, the more tools in the toolbox for how private working lands can remain economically viable, the better. Easements are a great tool, and we know that, gosh, do you even know what the figure is now for the demand? There's not enough money.
There's just not enough
There's
money.
just not enough money. So we know there's a huge demand for easements. But I can tell you there's also a ton of farmers that don't want easements, because perpetuity is kind of a long time. and that was the great thing about Williamson Act, is those are 10-year rolling contracts, so that at least provides, some more opportunity. Well, imagine if you could get a 5-year contract to provide wildlife habitat X, Y, Z. And there would be different ways you can do it. There's probably a baseline that folks are already providing to some extent, and maybe there's a baseline payment for that. But then if they're gonna go do some additional management practices to enhance that habitat or air quality or carbon sequestration, that might be a higher rate. So I think there's a lot of really great opportunities out there. It's just a matter of who's gonna pay and how's the market system work and all of that. One great example that is happening right now with the Rice Commission, I don't know if you folks have heard this, rice producers for a while have had farm bill payments available to them to provide wildlife habitat. So they flood the fields after the rice is harvested, and that's waterfowl habitat. They're taking that model this year, and they have, I think, 4 conservation groups, Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited, Defenders of Wildlife, I think there's one more, that those conservation groups are funding contracts with private landowners to provide that habitat. And they're gonna do a bid system, and the landowners can say, these are the practices that I can provide, and the conservation groups are going and say, okay, we'll pay this much, and they're gonna figure out some, which I think that's a great model. I love that conservation groups have that opportunity to put money directly into results on the ground that they're gonna see right away, and that's an additional income stream for landowners to consider. So that's another potential model. I know certainly that one of the challenges with ecosystem service payments and whether they can ever be used in lieu of mitigation, I don't want to put Ed out of business. But,
Plenty of regulation.
Right, and the mitigation, you're back to the permanence or the perpetuity challenge. So, those are just some factors to consider.
Can I interject
yes,
just for a second?
Please do.
Because there was one point you made that was really, I think, so critical. And we ran into this in a couple of situations. One is when Placer Legacy was formed, and they did the original study, there was 700,000 acres of privately owned open space. And the most ambitious protection program we had was to raise money to acquire easements over 50,000 acres. So my first comment when I was on the board was that a program to get 50,000 acres of easements or the current PCCP is not a resource management program for the other 650,000 acres. And that we need a comprehensive way of working with those private landowners that own the 650,000 acres to have a viable program. And I think, so your point, I think that's still a need. And
you don't know if the 50,000 acres that are identified are even willing sellers.
No. And so when we went to Sacramento to the SACOG Sustainable Communities thing, we thought, my God, how can you do sustainable communities without addressing the natural environment and working landscapes? No, they were going to have a sustainable, they've got millions to do sustainable communities around transportation planning.
Right.
So when we were down there, we said, where is the group that's interested in the 650,000 acres and what that means? And at that time, they didn't have one.
Yeah,
And
this is relatively new.
no, I don't know if what I'm saying here is I see what you're saying, and I think that what ecosystem services and payments and that's a subset of what are we going to do in working with the landowners who own the bulk of this privately owned and managed land, in helping them in their economic viability. And if they're not economically viable, they're not investing money in conservation. So I think you've hit something on the head, and anything that furthers the discussion of how to go about doing that in the RCD, playing a role in asking those questions, that's fantastic.
Can I give you an example that somewhat answers that?
Yeah.
In that, we know not one entity can fund all of that or has the resources to do it, but the partnerships that we've developed in this area with RCD, NRCS, SNC, youth groups, landowners, whatever, I think are heading in that direction. Like just a good example, a couple of weeks ago, we went on a docent led hike. I went out there, started talking to some of the people, and they were local landowners. They were interested in bees, so then they were asking me about weed control, because I was talking about, these horrible grasses. And I said, well, why don't you call the RCD? They can give you that technical assistance, or...
Barry?
Yeah. No, that was actually, Jeff Morton.
Okay.
I did it to two people. The other guy I met at America's Tire, he wanted to know about my Chevy Volt. Beside the point, you get that information out there, and it's part of that community effect. And the next thing you know, I got RCDs going out to their properties to tell them how they can work on weeds or enhance that habitat. And these aren't large parcels; these are little small 5-acre type things. But that's what I see, personally going out to either hikes. There's tons of workshops where Browns Valley Research Center. Or maybe the RCDs are putting on a workshop, and you see a lot of agencies and nonprofits all together. Our complex alone is awesome for that kind of connection and networking. We're constantly bouncing from that building to talk to SNC. I spend more than enough time, we'll probably get in trouble for it at the Fish and Wildlife place, because we're always trying to collaborate. Go, I got these landowners, I got this education center, they're in trouble. How can we all work together? So it's not concrete as you would have in, say, a government agency trying to take care of something, but I think we are going in that direction. We have people here at this table that are really trying to go above and beyond their job titles to make that work.
Well, back in the day, there was some controversy, but it went, it was something like this. We don't have the financial, it's not sustainable. We don't have the financial resources to buy all the land that we want to see managed properly. We don't have the resources to buy all the easements needed to deal with that. So the complaint was, or the direction was, say, shift some of the resources to buying these things to supporting better management on the land, supporting the owners who are working on the lands. Now, and it's not either or, and we shouldn't be in a competitive climate. But the management end needs to be much more supported. Then you get to the third sector, which I think is even more critical. How do you harness economic forces? So you're working with the economic forces those landowners are dealing with. So, because we don't have the resources to pay everybody to conserve land either. It has to fit within some kind of economic model where through our support of profitability of these ownerships, that the resources are becoming available to do the stewardship. So
Crowdfunding. No. I say that a little bit in jest, but I do think, people move, as it was said, people move here because they like the environment and healthy ecosystems and whatever. And I think a lot of people, not that you shouldn't still do this, but pay their annual membership to any number of environmental organizations, which is useful. But if they knew they also had the option of funding a project that was going to happen on the ground in the county that they live, that was going to produce these environmental outcomes in addition to supporting a private landowner, I think folks would do that if that opportunity was available. So what I'm rolling all this into is we are very, very ripe in Placer County for a pilot of some sort. Yeah. And because I'm a policy wonk nerd and I like this stuff, I'm trying to find one. And I would love to work with all of you in doing that. And I've had this conversation with Lauren and Robert Wygant, and they all, at least in those conversations, still really see the role for this as well, besides the easement pieces. And there's not a perfect solution right now, but there's a lot of good projects and good information out there that, you know, we would want to pull from to create a pilot in the fastest growing county in the state that has, you know, some tools in place, but also is, you know, rapidly paving over farmland and, you know, all of those conservation benefits. So you will hear from me again because I am trying to get something going and I'm open to all ideas. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I was just gonna say that, what we're planning to do is actually take some of those, other functional groups, other action groups from the California Summit, including finance, and we're gonna use those as topics for similar discussions like this. So
Gotcha.
that would be wonderful. Do you know what I mean? Like, just inviting people to bring creative ideas on crowdfunding, like the slow food movement. There may be another little model kind of within there that may be used in other ways. So just creative ways of doing that, but I see that as being a whole nother
Well,
evening coming up.
one big example of this, that an opportunity exists right now, is there's been work done on community-based investment. So that local people have an investment vehicle that they can invest in their community. Now, when that's done, a lot of that money goes to support sustainable ag and small business development on farms. So, you know, we could work on a micro lending program for small entrepreneurs on these lands. That's an example of working with the economy to create, you know, the prosperity that then in turn makes that working landscape more viable. So that's something, that's an example of what we can be putting together. Exciting.
All right. So are you done?
I am.
And I didn't mean to rush you.
No, look at that.
Good job.
Oh,